welcome to another chapter of Read Aloud. We will be reading chapter 6 today, and here is your thinking question. In this chapter, Aurella makes a big mistake, and I want you to think about, do you think she made the right choice, or was there maybe a better option? All right, let's get started. Chapter 6. Aurella ruins her entire life. School the next day was just as brutal as it had always been. The kids still harassed and picked on Aurella. Someone accidentally spilled tea down the front of her dress. Another shoved her into a wall. Gia called her a witch, and Jarell called her a freak. But Aurella no longer felt demeaned or hurt. It was like she had a little protective bubble around her all day. Each time someone called her a witch, it only invigorated her spirit. Yes, I am a witch, and if I weren't so nice, I could make you pick your nose and eat it. It was almost like having an inside joke with herself, an exciting secret that no one else knew. Aurella walked home from school that day whistling. She was so caught up in her little cocoon of happiness that she almost didn't notice the kids running in the opposite direction. Love it when this happens, one of them laughed. Maybe we'll get lucky this time. Another chuckled darkly. Can't wait to see him go down. This time will be different. There's no way he'll get through that many guys. Aurella didn't need to ask to know what was happening. Mavic was in another fight. All the kids would gather around, hoping to see him lose, and he'd take down the attacker with one punch. It wasn't news. This happened every week, sometimes more. Aurella never followed the crowd. She knew how it would end. She also had no desire to see Mavic like that. That fierce look on his face and menacing battle stance secretly frightened her. But something felt different about this time. The running crowd seemed more excited than curious, almost expectant. This time will be different. There's no way he'll get through that many guys. What did that mean? Were they assembling an army of eager teenage boys to take down the undefeated Mavic? How many would there be? What were they going to do to him? Aurella sprinted after the crowd. A huge gathering of adolescents and children was assembled in a clearing behind the school. They were whooping and shouting and laughing. One kid broke through the crowd and ran away crying, clutching a swollen black eye. Aurella shoved through the mob, stepping on toes and squeezing through bodies until she made it to the front. There was a ring of cheering kids and teenagers, and in the middle of the ring, a fight raged on. It was difficult to process the scene, to focus on just one thing. The group in the middle of the crowded circle was a flurry of arms and legs. Every once in a while it would slow down enough to see someone get punched in the face or kicked in the gut. Aurella had arrived just in time to see Mavic elbowed in the face and blood spurting from his nose. Then he disappeared again. Aurella panicked. Mavic was hurt. There was no way he could fight through so many people. Impulsively, Aurella ran forward and shouted, "All of you stop fighting and go home!" Immediately, the flurry of arms and legs separated into individual people. Several large teenage boys froze, then scattered, shoving their way through the crowd. Mavic was one of them. Aurella prepared to push her way through the crowd of onlookers, but when she stepped forward, everyone made way for her, quickly flinching away as if she was infected with some fatal infectious disease. She sprinted after Mavic, who was running toward the orphanage. "Mavic, stop running!" He immediately skidded to a stop and whirled on Aurella. "What were you thinking?" he shouted, wiping the blood from his nose. Aurella, who was expecting some kind of thank you, staggered back, shocked by his tone. "What are you talking about? I just saved you." "I have them. I was fine. Why did you do that, Aurella? Why?" His ingratitude made Aurella clench her fists in anger. "Just because you're too prideful to accept help when you need it." "This isn't about me. Do you realize what you just did?" Shouting voices followed them down the path. Mavic tensed. He grabbed Aurella's wrist and sprinted into the forest, dragging her behind him. They ran deeper than they'd ever gone before. The trees grew closer and closer together, and the sun felt farther away. Eventually, Mavic stopped running and let go of her wrist. They each stood panting in tense silence. Then, Mavic put his hands over his face and let out an angry sigh. "What is your deal?" demanded Aurella.
"You just put your life in danger to save me from a few cuts and bruises. Do you realize what you just did? You just exposed yourself to half the village. They were just calling you names before. Now they know it's for real."
"Maybe they didn't notice."
"Try to imagine what it looked like to someone in the crowd. Little Ella walks into the fight, shouts something in a foreign language, and suddenly the fight breaks up and everyone runs away. I'm pretty sure they noticed."
He swore and punched a tree. Aurella was suddenly fuming. "Why are you mad at me?"
"I'm mad because you put yourself in danger. This is serious. You have to leave Lennox. You need to get out of Dovis as soon as possible."
"What do you mean I have to get out of Dovis?"
"People are going to come after you and your family. It's going to be just like before. They'll come find you and kill you. Do you understand what I'm saying?"
"I have to leave?"
"You have to go away. You can never go home. If you want you and your parents to stay alive, you have to get out of here."
His words pulled the world out from under Aurella's feet. Her breaths became shorter and shorter until she was lightheaded and her vision blurred.
"Ella?"
Mavic's scowl faltered at her pained expression. I... She couldn't finish. How could she? What could a person say after losing everything they've ever known? Mavic sighed and shook his head.
"Maybe someday you could come back when things have calmed down, but right now it's not safe for you here."
Aurella sat on a rock and held her head in her hands. Mavic sat down beside her.
"So, I guess I'll sneak into my house tonight, leave a note for my parents, and then go..."
"Where?"
"Rashtika."
"Rashtika? You mean where the warlocks live?"
"And witches. And Rashtika manipulators are free. They can go about their daily lives without fear of being found and captured."
"That's going to be a long journey."
"It will. And it's going to be dangerous."
Aurella sighed and looked around at this forest that had been her haven all her life. She felt like she'd never noticed just how beautiful it was and how much it meant to her. She studied the sturdy oak trees and fluffy pine trees and watched birds flit from branch to branch, twittering happily, oblivious to her world just ending. She touched the soft dirt coating the forest floor and closed her eyes. She listened as creatures rustled in the bushes behind her, wishing her life could be as simple as theirs. She'd never been so close to tears in her life. Losing her family was going to be hard enough, so hard she hadn't even begun to process it fully. But losing Mavic, this was going to be the hardest goodbye of her life. She took a long, deep breath and said what she needed to say. "You better go. It's getting dark." Mavic's eyebrows went up in shock.
"What? I'm going with you, smart one."
Her broken heart almost burst from her chest.
"Really?" "Well, duh. Come on, Elf. You're like 12. What kind of surrogate brother would I be if I let you run off by yourself?"
Unable to contain her relief, she hugged him so tight she felt like her arms would break.
"It's going to be all right,"
he promised, wrapping his arms around her. Aurella let go of Mavic and looked up at him with a worried expression. "So, what do we do?"
"Definitely don't go home, but we're going to need to come up with a plan before we leave." Can you disguise yourself?"
Aurella raised an eyebrow. "Really?"
"Oh, right. I forgot you were a freaky little monster who can make herself invisible and stuff."
Aurella smacked him upside the head.
"Anyway, we'll need to stock up on supplies. I can steal some stuff from the orphanage, but I don't want to arouse suspicion sooner than necessary. So I think what we can do is disguise you. I'll take you back to the orphanage. We'll stay there for the night. I'll grab what we need in the morning, and then we'll leave."
"I'm scared."
Mavic rubbed her arms. Don't be scared. It's going to be fine. We'll leave tomorrow morning, and before you know it, we'll be in Rashtika. You'll be safe.
Mavic,
Yeah?
will you please tell me why you know so much about manipulators?
A sad look came over his face. It's not a happy story, Aurella.
Please?
Mavic took a deep breath, then blew it out slowly through his lips. I knew your birth parents before they died. They were the coolest people I'd ever met. Morella and Morton. In all honesty, they were the closest things I'd ever had to parents in my life.
How did you know them?
Morella volunteered at the orphanage a lot. Sometimes she'd take me home to have dinner with her and Morton. He was a warlock, by the way.
What? I thought you'd said there'd never been any warlocks in Dovis.
I said they never had a history here, and according to anyone you ask, there haven't been any warlocks in Dovis. But way back during the War of the Manipulators, the big war that split the country in half, I think there were a few warlocks that sided with the humans and ended up moving south. They obviously didn't want anyone to know that they were warlocks because they had a really bad rep. I mean, it was the warlocks that started the war in the first place.
So, Morton was a warlock?
Yep, and a dang good one, too. They taught me a lot about manipulation.
Wait, why would they tell you that they were manipulators? You were just a little kid. What if you blabbed?
He deflected the question with a wave of his hand. I'll get to that later. So anyway, things started looking pretty bad for witches at the time. It had been a long time coming. Humans were scared of what they could do. They began persecuting them, especially the king and queen. They were the ones that led the massive witch hunt. And the scariest thing about it was that it was happening underneath everyone's noses. A few witches would disappear at a time, so spread out that no one would notice the connection. But witches were dying every day. Eventually, they began noticing and attempted fleeing to Rashtika. Some of them succeeded. Others didn't. Morella and Morton would have fled, but she was really pregnant at the time and probably wouldn't have made it.
How is this happening? She demanded. How are they killing witches without anyone noticing?
Well, it's kind of ironic. The queen is a witch.
She what?
Yeah, she was the mastermind behind it all. Maybe she wanted to be the most powerful, so she wiped out all the other witches. And the king was extremely prejudiced too. But anyway, how'd she do it? It's so simple, it's scary. One of the things about witches is that they can't manipulate each other.
They can't?
Nope.
So if I made myself invisible in front of another witch,
she'd still be able to see you. So anyway, what she did was go from door to door with a bunch of clankers, magically disguised as one of them. She'd ask for the woman of the house. If the woman were not a witch, she would fall for the disguise and ask the pretend clanker what he wanted. If the woman were a witch, she'd see through the disguise. She would see the queen standing at her door, bow, and call her Your Majesty. And that simple response would give her away. The queen would command her guards to kill the witch and then move on to another house a good distance from that one.
But wouldn't families fight? Aurella asked.
They could, but this is the queen we're talking about. If they fought, they would also lose their lives.
So how am I alive?
Mavic bit his lip. Morella and Morton never expected to survive, but they desperately hoped that you could live. I was there the night you were born. It kind of sucks because everything was all wonderful and happy, and then the next day the clankers came. Morella knew about the trap, so as soon as she opened the door to the queen, she attacked. Some clankers tried to fight her off, but she was a super good sword fighter. Aurella held her hand up to stop him.
She just gave birth and the next day she was sword fighting?
Warlocks are also healers. They can manipulate the body into healing itself.
How?
Mavic sighed. Do you want me to finish the story?
Yes, but just explain about the healing thing. I thought warlocks couldn't manipulate people.
Bodies are tangible objects. You have a body, but you aren't your body. It's simply a house for your soul. And that way your body's kind of an object. That is why warlocks can manipulate it. They can't make the body do anything because what you do with your body has to do with your mind and your soul. But they can manipulate the body itself. So anyway, Morton was able to heal Morella a bit to get her back into shape.
If she knew about the trap, why didn't she just pretend to think the queen was a clanker or something?
Yeah, that would have been smart. But they didn't know how the queen was disguised. None of the other witches had stuck around to tell them. And besides, Morton was a bit, impulsive.
Mavic gave a pained smile.
He wanted to kill the queen. Killing her would end the witch hunt. While they were both fighting, Morton succeeded in wounding the queen, and Morella took down a couple of clankers, but in the end there were too many of them. Mavic took a deep breath. And they were killed.
So how did I survive? She asked quietly. Then it dawned on her. It was you! You were the little boy in my dream who carried me away.
You're welcome,
he smiled. Then what happened? Did you take me back to the orphanage with you? He gave her another sad smile.
I couldn't take you there, Ella. I'd lived there all my short life, being parentless, watching nice couples come and go, hoping to get adopted only to be disappointed when they picked some other kid. I didn't want that for you. As I was running, I remembered a couple that had recently come to the orphanage, and right then, I knew I had to take you to them. But I didn't know where they lived. It was a stroke of luck. As I was running through the streets with you in my arms, I saw them sitting on their porch outside enjoying the stars. I ran up to them. I tried to think of what to say, how to convince them to take you, but in the end, I didn't have to say anything.
What do you mean? Aurella asked.
They just knew. Your mom took one look at you and started crying. She took you from my arms and said, "My baby, I've been looking all over for you." Your dad started crying too. He kissed your forehead, then kissed your mom, and all of a sudden, you were a family.
Aurella sat staring at Mavic with her mouth open until he put his finger under her chin and closed her mouth for her. She had never heard the story of her adoption. She'd never asked about it. It didn't seem to matter to her. Her parents were her parents, and it didn't matter that they weren't blood related. But hearing the story firsthand from Mavic reinforced the truth of what she already knew. Finally, Mavic broke the silence.
I'm sorry I got so mad earlier, but do you understand why now?
Aurella just bit her lip.
Morella and Morton gave their lives to protect you. If you're not careful with the life they gave you, it's like they died in vain.
Aurella knew he was right, but she couldn't help getting defensive. I know I need to be careful, and I know I basically just screwed up my entire life by exposing myself. But can you please just give me a break for like a second? It's who I am. I can't just pretend I'm not a witch.
Not even for your own safety?
You just don't understand. You have no right to judge because you have no idea how hard it is. Mavic raised an eyebrow.
Don't I?
Aurella felt a tickle in her left ear. Not now, Mavic.
What? I didn't do anything.
He held up his hands in innocence. Aurella slowly turned her head to the left. There was a feather floating right in front of her face. It wasn't gracefully falling to the ground as a feather usually does. It was suspended in the air, unnaturally frozen in place. Mavic? Keeping her eyes on the feather, she saw Mavic do something with his hands in her peripheral vision. The moment his hands moved, the feather started tickling her nose. The truth barreled into Aurella like a wrecking ball, and she staggered backward in surprise. She looked at Mavic with new eyes, and her jaw dropped. All right, that's the end of that chapter. Not sure if you understood exactly what that meant about Mavic, but we're going to talk more about that in the next chapter. And that chapter is called Stealing from an Orphanage. Dang it. All right, so just a reminder, your thinking question for this chapter was, what do you think Aurella should have done? Did she do the right thing when she saved Mavic and exposed herself to the whole village? Or was there some other option that maybe you would have done if you were in her position? And I will see you next time for Chapter 7. Bye!